Senator Ricketts.
Thank you, Dr. Nesbitt, for being here today. Wishing you leadership of Fish and Wildlife. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Appreciate that. Ranking Member. Director Nesbitt, thank you very much for your leadership at Fish and Wildlife, and thank you very much for being here. Thank you also for opening up the grazing access to the Valentine National Wildlife Refuge following the devastating wildfires that we had here in Nebraska. It has been something where we've had the most fire damage in the state's history. Over 1 million acres were burned, and everything we can do to be able to help out our ranchers recover is greatly appreciated. So thank you for that. In addition, it was great to talk to you yesterday to hear your perspectives on what the agency can do to improve ESA implementation. This administration's Fish and Wildlife Service has reinstated several of the first Trump administration's rulemakings that improve the ESA implementation. Thank you for your continued efforts to improve transparency, reduce regulatory overreach, and provide clear definitions for those impacted by ESA regulations. As chairman of the Water, Fisheries, and Wildlife Subcommittee, I hosted a hearing on ESA and found that a greater focus on species recovery and transparency is critical to reforming a law that has too often failed to meet its conservation objectives. Since the ESA was enacted in 1973, only 57 of the more than 1,700 listed species have been delisted. That's roughly 3% of the species ever listed as endangered or threatened have been recovered. That does not sound like a very successful recovery metric to me, and really encourages us to take a look at the programs and see what we can do to improve the rate of recovery among species. The pallid sturgeon is one of those species. It's in the Missouri River, and it's been the focus of a long-standing effort to be able to achieve recovery efforts under the ESA since it was listed as endangered in 1990. Since 1994, researchers have carried out a propagation program that has released millions of age 0 pallid sturgeon and over 150,000 pallid sturgeon with over 1 year old into the Missouri River. These propagation efforts have continued with the establishment of the Missouri River Recovery Program by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in 2006. Under Section 7 of the ESA, the Corps is required to consult with Fish and Wildlife Service. The recovery plan sets numeric standard for downlisting the pallid sturgeon. So we want to have 5,000 genetically diverse adult fish in each management unit sustained for over 2 generations. So we're talking 20 or 30 years. Currently, the data indicates the pallid sturgeon population is estimated at 2,517 fish as of October 2024. So after more than 30 years of attempting this, we've made it about halfway there. I will note that about 2/3 of the fish I just mentioned are actually from the propagation efforts. However, we can see that we're not making a ton of progress. Director Nesbitt, what steps can U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service take to better align the recovery and delisting framework for the pallid sturgeon and other species with the long-term recovery efforts with a more realistic and achievable benchmarks to be able to get this done?
Well, thank you. Certainly appreciate the question, Senator. So first, I would just highlight that, on the endangered species list, and you alluded to this, there are species that are imperiled and need help and investment with recovery, and there are species that are on the list that are recovered, but just simply have not had the investment to be able to remove them from the list. And what that does is it diverts resources. Every species that's on the list requires some level of support and investment from the federal government. Delisting species that are recovered but just need to be pushed over the line through the regulatory process creates an opportunity to then use those resources for those species on the list that generally need help. The other thing I think that's important with regards to specifically, I don't know the biology and the history and background with pallid sturgeon, but I would say that one of our focuses is, and if these ESA regulations are finalized, a provision will enable us to use basically the same criteria that you use, the 5-factor analysis that we use to list a species will also be used to determine if a species should be delisted. Same exact process for both. And I think that is something that will help us with these species that I described that have reached recovery, but simply haven't had the investment to get them through the regulatory process to get them delisted.
Okay. Well, I'm just about out of time, but I do want to wrap up on some other things real quickly. On special status assessments for species, what I encourage you to do is have a lot of transparency with regard to that so the public can know ahead of time as you're going through this, whether it's the data sense modeling assumptions, the analytical methods that you're using on the SSA, so the public can know what's going on. And then I'd also encourage you to make sure that you're doing the best you can to encourage, to educate landowners what they are responsible for with regard to endangered species as well. And I'll just give you an example. When I was governor of Nebraska, there was a rancher who was talking to me about he's going to re-up his CRP land. You have to do it every 7 years. And what had been put in there is that he had to protect the habitat of the swift fox. He had never seen a swift fox. He went to his FSA office and said, what do I have to do to be able to comply with this new rule you want me to sign up for in my CRP agreement? And they couldn't answer him. And so he declined to sign up for the CRP land because he's like, I'm not going to agree in a contract, a written contract, to protect the habitat of an animal I haven't even seen on my property, and you can't even tell me what I have to do to protect it. So we need to be able to make sure we're giving landowners the information they need and what their responsibilities are if they're going to sign these agreements, so that we can continue to have these programs. So I'd encourage you, whatever you can do to be able to help encourage that. That would help landowners be responsible and also protect them against being sued for things that they may not have any control over or obligations they may not have understood they had. So thank you, Director Nesbitt.
Thank you,
Thanks for
Senator.
being here.